So my name is Eric Day. I work at Rackspace. One of the few that moved over there after Sun.
And I'm Monty Taylor. I also work at Rackspace. And also moved over there from Sun before they became local.
Yes.
Both of us did that.
And a lot of the talks that you may have seen before on Drizzle have been focusing on community, what the project's all about. We're going to try to focus more on actually using it. You know, what features you may or may not want. You know, how to start the thing, how to install it, and also introducing a new command line tool, which works in Drizzle, but it's not specific to the project. So, I guess I just said that. Yeah. What is Drizzle? So our tagline on the Launchpad page is a lightweight SQL database for the cloud and web. And that's a bit vague, you realize this, so we're going to step through.
So Drizzle is lightweight. One of the first things that we did, and actually we, even to this day, continue to be able to do this, is delete code. We find great pleasure in deleting code, deleting features, deleting pretty much anything we can. As long as the server still compiles once I'm done, it's a good day for me when I'm deleting stuff. But we've been focused on taking core features out of the database and moving them behind plugin interfaces, so that the core itself is as light as we continue to make the core as lightweight and as lean as it can possibly be. And then if you happen to be a place that needs 17,000 features, then you can add them in. That's fine. But we want it in and of itself to be minimal.
Yeah, and more than just deleting code, we're actually trying to push the code that is useful up to plugins, so it's completely optional that it's in your runtime. So that's sort of the lightweight piece. Now, it's an SQL database. Big surprise here. The reason why we sort of still mention that is all the NoSQL stuff going on. We still think there's room for SQL in the cloud. We still think there's a lot of room for collaboration between, an SQL database like Drizzle and other NoSQL databases. There are even little projects going on to integrate the two. So, we are SQL, we're relational, we're not going to hop on the NoSQL bandwagon because we're a fork of MySQL. It would be easier to start one from scratch if we want to do something that was in MySQL.
We're aiming at the cloud. One of the things, that of course can mean many different things, and actually gave a talk a couple of days ago and spent most of the talk talking about what the cloud actually is, so we won't bore you with that. But suffice it to say that for me at the moment, a lot of what this means is it's not about writing the Drizzle Facebook application. You're not going to go to your account and add a Drizzle and then play Drizzleville or something. You're gonna, but it may be the thing that runs the cloud infrastructure and is integrated in that way. So that's sort of I think where we're getting at in the cloud environment these days.
Yeah, and obviously we're working at Rackspace and they have a cloud service, if you haven't heard of it. And we're going to be looking at ways of, not specifically for Rackspaces, to just how can a relational database work in the cloud? Because MySQL has been used in a lot of more traditional approaches. You have your own set of servers or something like that, and there's a completely different set of resource constraints when you're working in virtual machine environments. So we're not afraid to tackle those issues and look to see what it means to use Drizzle on any cloud out there. So we're trying to take all these new virtual machine changes and work with them.
At the same time, we haven't stopped being usable by the normal web. If you haven't made it to the cloud yet and you're still back on that web thing, which I guess is still around and I guess some people are still using, there's a WordPress plugin right now which allows WordPress to work on top of Drizzle via the PHP Drizzle connector. We've got, actually Stuart has a port of paste bin that he runs on his server. It's actually down at the moment, and I like to yell at him for that. But it's not Drizzle's fault. It's still every bit as good for being a web backend database as MySQL is, and in fact, in some ways, I think it. to be better suited to doing that. Of course, if I didn't think that, I'd probably be working on the wrong project. But yeah, it's not, it does not require you to be running like inside of EC2 or something like that, or Rackspace cloud service.
So we're still trying to, stay relevant for many different architectures. So one of the things we've been, really focusing on with Drizzle is our plugins. Everything, we're trying to make everything a plugin possible, essentially. Because we don't know what your architecture is. We want to integrate it with what you already have. We don't want to give you, here's your new auth system, here is how you're going to store data, and here are the functions that are available to you. Like, we don't know what you need. So make interfaces for everything. So maybe we already have what you need, but if we don't, it's going to be really easy for you to build those.
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to say, along that line, one of the things that I find important about that last thing is, for me, is the distinction of that we want to be part of your infrastructure. We don't want to be your infrastructure. So as much as Ed was talking about the sort of the complete Oracle software stack earlier this morning, which was lovely. And that's actually, you can sort of see that in the like over the years, the solution a lot of times in an Oracle shop is put that in the database. Like, here this, let's run Oracle Web Forms because what we really want is a web server in the database. We don't want to do that. Apache and Lighty both exist out there, and they're just fine, thanks. So it's not really about being this central hub of goodness that everything must radiate around, as much as understanding that you probably got your stuff going on. And I'd like to figure out how I best can play with your stuff, rather than making you play with mine. It sounded a little bit dirty. Sorry.
Moving on. So one of the plugins is the protocol. This is something that I've worked with quite a bit, and right now we speak a specific Drizzle protocol, which is a slight variation of the MySQL protocol, but we're starting to evolve that quite a bit, and we have a whole set of features like sharding lined up and some other things. But we also speak the MySQL protocol right now, and in the future, what we want to do is open up the door for supporting any type of protocol that you can think of. For example, you may want to put a REST-based interface directly on the Drizzle server because maybe your Ajax applications want to talk to the database directly. Whether that fits in the architecture or not, we'll see. But being able to, essentially have a protocol interface where you can extend and write your own protocol handlers, either through embedded or through, network communication. This is where we're going to go. And we've got Postgres protocol in here, which is certainly a possibility. It's not too much on the roadmap.
I've got a question mark by it, because the thought there is that there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't, if it was important to you, it's an open system, write a Postgres protocol plugin, or if you wanted to, you could write an Oracle protocol plugin.
Crazy. So this takes a look at the server startup, and what you'll see is that, it by default it binds to both MySQL and Drizzle ports, which are, you can see there, the 3306 and the 4427. And you can see we are IP6 capable. So it starts off, and one of the other protocol plugins that I actually wrote for development purposes is a console plugin, which is basically a embedded shell directly in the server. And when you start up, you get this prompt, and you can run queries against it. And it basically shows from the command line directly into the parser. There's no protocol, there's nothing happening there, it's just straight into the execution engine of that. Now, from a development point of view, this is easy since you don't have to start a program to be debugging your applications when you just want to debug the database. But the other thing is using this, and I want to expand on this protocol, or this protocol plugin, even though it's embedded a little, because you can actually have really fast data loads if you're loading directly from the shell. So, like I said, with the Drizzle protocol, we're changing things up a bit. If you're familiar with the Expo comic, those lobby tables, we don't have SQL injection attacks in that form. You get one SQL statement per command. But what we're doing, to overcome, the reason why that was in there, what you want that for is basically to be able to specify multiple SQL commands and have that happen all in the same TCP packet being sent to the server. And it'll still execute serially on the other server end, but basically being able to push multiple down so you don't have that network latency for every single command. What we're going to do instead is actually have concurrent queries directly inside the protocol, so you can batch up multiple packets and encapsulate every command with a proper protocol packet. So you're not having to do crazy things with your SQL like separating with semicolons and having those issues. We're going to have direct sharding in there, and one of the things we want to do is have an HTTP redirect essentially. So if you're doing large sharding architectures and you are needing to migrate one shard to another database server, you can say, hey, give me that. It's like, hey, I don't own this data anymore. Go over to the new shard, and your applications can seamlessly redirect.
One of the nice things about both the sharding key and the redirect that he's talking about is that it allows. Right now when you're doing sharding, you're having to encode a lot of the mentality or the information about the sharding into the application, which is great and fine, it works well, because you do want that to be managed on the client side from a scaling perspective. But it means that you've got stuff that's going into the code that's being managed potentially by developers or a development process that has something to do with operational issues. Whereas if the nodes themselves can understand who they are and their relation to other nodes, which is an operations and architectural thing, then sort of just like you would have the ops guys actually manage how the web servers work, and then the app guys put things on there, you can have that separation of labor and also separation of how it's managed and how it's configured. Because really the sharding situation is more of a application architecture decision than the guy writing the Flash framework.
So how do you actually talk to Drizzle right now? Since it supports the MySQL protocol, any MySQL client should work. One of the things you have to watch out for is some clients, like the default MySQL command line client, has some certain SQL statements that it runs to populate things like path completion and so forth. Not all the SQL commands that MySQL supports, Drizzle supports. We worked a few things out, and things like create table, little parentheses, around integers. Those aren't actually how big the integer is. It's just formatting, which is lots of old legacy code when you actually just looked at the output and the database put it up correctly. So there's going to be some SQL incompatibility. So not every MySQL client will work with it, but instead we have with Drizzle, which is a complete, protocol implementation written in C. We have a number of wrapper languages over it. And it allows you to speak both the Drizzle and MySQL protocol, so you can switch between them if you want. The idea is once the Drizzle protocol is stable, we're just going to switch that to the default and the Drizzle connection creation. And then you're just going to start using the new protocol and get all the benefits of it without having to change your application. So the other nice thing about this is it's BSD licensed, so you don't have to pay licensing fees to use a client. You can embed it anywhere you want. So go to town. Schedule.
So after you connect to the database, the next thing that's going to happen is that the protocol is going to hand off your query to the scheduler to have it actually execute inside the thing. So that'll control how things are going. Right now we have 3 of them. We're defaulting it at the moment to the current default MySQL scheduler, which is the multi-threaded or the one thread per connection scheduler. It's pretty standard.
Also known as the monthly threaded.
The monthly threaded? Wow, yeah, I can't type, it turns out. So we have a monthly threaded scheduler, which is, if you don't know what monthly is, then I recommend you go back to grad school database design, and you can really understand what that is. We also have the pool threads scheduler, which is based off of the new pool thread scheduler that was in MySQL 6.0 before MySQL 6.0 became MySQL 5.2. And before came 5.4. Anyway, it got some work done on it last year by a Google Summer Code student. It still has some issues, but it's there. We also have a single-threaded scheduler. Not saying that you really necessarily need that, but it's there sort of if you want to see what a scheduler looks like without threading.
Or if you, for some reason, have some strange application that knows
Yeah.
what.
Who knows?
It's,
Yeah.
it's possible that it will have some useful.
Yeah, I've got a question mark behind the next one, which is since it's pluggable, there's no reason if you're doing because coming back to this idea of integration with your infrastructure, all of these other schedulers are written to be generic and to try and be able to be a one-size-fits-all scheduler. But if you're running on something very weird and esoteric like Solaris, and you've got there's some things that aren't POSIX or aren't sort of standardly found everywhere, but potentially what's that darn their thing that's like libevent that's not libevent. Their equal thing that's
That's
yeah.
an event too.
I know, yeah. There's the thing is if you wanted to write something that took specific advantage of something that that's going on in your thing, there's no reason you can't do that. It doesn't have to be applicable to platforms that can't run anything like OS 10. You can, that's a definite possibility and an integration point potential.
Yeah, and one thing is if somebody actually ever wants a Windows port of Drizzle, you don't have to mess with the threads. You can actually just go ahead and use Windows scheduling and write a plugin for it. So.
Yeah. So I don't know how many of you have ever seen a bog standard sort of PHP website hosted environment sort of thing, but the sort of one of the standard things that will happen is you'll spin up your MySQL database, you'll write your PHP code, and then you'll take the one user account that you created in MySQL, and you'll paste the username and the password of that account into the PHP scripts, which is fine because you're controlling via network security how things get to anything. In fact, you might even be just connecting to localhost, right? It's a web server, it's got a thing running on it, it's got your database running on it. And so then every time you run a query, you're running through a code path to ask the server if your application can talk to your database via the only user that you have in the database. And you incur CPU execution costs there. We made this pluggable because that's a little bit ridiculous. There's certainly great use cases for when you need authentication. There's also use cases out there and are very common in the world where you don't actually need any authentication and you're just paying the cost for it. So we default to no authentication plugin whatsoever. However, we have a PAM authentication plugin written so that if you're running on any of the Unixes, which is running anyway, and you've got user accounts already, you can authenticate that way. And pretty much any of the plugins that PAM supports, like Kerberos or LDAP or any of those things, you could authenticate against. So that's great. Then Eric's working on an LDAP, a specific LDAP plugin for this, which will allow you to, without going through the PAM layer, authenticate directly against whatever your system's infrastructure, LDAP infrastructure looks like.
We're actually working on a Drizzle schema, and we have a officially registered OID for the LDAP space for Drizzle. So we're going to have a standard set of attribute types for LDAP that are Drizzle, so you can apply it to your own schemas if you're running LDAP right now. So the other thing to note with authentication is, we have up here that there's Drizzle maybe want to authenticate before that to another server to authenticate for you. Maybe you have one central server that has some tables in it that manages your users, and you want your frontline databases to authenticate against that. So it's possible to write an authentication plugin that doesn't necessarily just talk to LDAP or HTTP, but you could actually talk to another database to say, am I authenticated to do this? Mm-hmm. And one of the nice things with once the new Drizzle protocol is in, is if you're in one of those architectures where you don't need authentication, this is actually going to save 2 round-trip times on every connect. Because the way that the MySQL protocol works, you actually, to incur the cost of doing this authentication handshake, you incur 2 round-trip times before you can even send a MySQL query to it. So we're going to be looking at little optimizations like that, which really add up when you're doing lots and lots of connections.
Yeah. In addition, so after you've authenticated to the database, that's great. That pretty much specifies whether when I connect in and I say, hi, I'm Monty, to the database, authentication answers the question, am I actually Monty? Is my identity valid? But a separate but related question is, what things can I access? What objects can I see? There's sort of three different categories of this in the plugin interface, which are schema, table, and process. So if I'm Monty, if I do show process list, can I see other people's queries that they're running other than my own? That would be the process thing. Can I see tables? What set of tables can I see and access? And what set of schemas can I see and access? We default to sort of like authentication. We default to absolutely no authorization control whatsoever. So if you have both of them turned off, you connect, you say, I'm Monty. It goes, great, you're Monty. And you say, I want to access the table. It says, great, I'd love to give you access to this table. So it's a restrictive policy. You can write or use one of the ones we've got, or write one, a plugin for this that then implements these three methods, or actually two of them. One of them's optional.
Yeah, they're actually very trivial. It can be as simple as a simple string comparison of, am I group, am I this, am I that, and return true false. So some of these plugins are extremely easy to write, or even people who are traditionally not developers.
Yeah, I actually just realized a simple, basic multi-tenant scheme that's pretty common is that you only want a user to be able to see their own schema. So I'm going to actually write a plugin probably sometime this week when I get around to it to implement that sort of simple hard-coded in policy. So it's not even accessing an external authorization provider, but it'll just essentially say if your username is root, you can see anything. If your username is anything other than root, then you can only see a schema. You can only see tables and schemas that are named the same as your user. And what's that? See that? And it's going to be this much C code, and it'll be implemented in that hard code. And all you got to do as an administrator is load the server with that policy.
That's basically how our MySQL authentication is now.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty common setup.
Yeah, and so that should be a really easy code path, a much less expensive code path than actually having a genericized, I'm going to read rules setup and then implement that into the rules, which you could do, but in this case, solve the common case for folks.
So this is a plugin point that we don't completely have yet, and we don't have any plugins, but it's kind of a hot topic in the MySQL world of don't use the query cache because it doesn't scale because of concurrency issues. It can obviously be made to scale. Right now, obviously we don't have one, so default plugin is none. But it's really easy to imagine that we can have a memcache backed query cache, and doing finer levels of granularity as far as the locking goes and validation. So you can do some pretty creative things to get that same cache experience without having the issues. We have a query filter, which Patrick, sitting over there, he actually did this plugin. And you're able to write a plugin that is able to look at the string of the SQL query in the server before it actually hits the parser. So if there's a really common thing that your users are doing, and you're in an environment where it's really hard to change like what other people are doing, such as a shared hosting environment where hey, everyone on my shared hosting environment is using WordPress and they have the SQL query that they always do, that always sucks. And if we could just tweak the query a little bit, it would make our life so much easier. You can write a plugin that does a simple, string manipulation to make that query faster, pretty much as soon as it comes in off the wire and before it gets passed down to us.
Yeah.
So logging.
One of the things, obviously, from an operations perspective that you continually want is logging of what the server's doing. I saw that in Mark's presentation about MySQL Enterprise Monitors. It's all about collecting data from your server. One of the ways that they were accomplishing that in that stack was putting hooks in the client API to make additional connections when you send a query to the server, to also send that information to the monitoring server, which is totally valid and certainly one way to do that. But one of the things that we've got is the logging at the server level is pluggable because everything's pluggable, right? And so for things like general query log, as it is in MySQL today, well, that's a plugin. There's a plugin that basically will log queries to a file, and that's exciting. But you can also do potentially more interesting things, such as log, and it's it doesn't even have to be queries because the logging interface gets the session object, which represents the sort of execution thread inside of the server. So you can really log anything that you wanted to about the state of what's happening at that point in time. And you get a pre and a post hook, so before it executes and after it executes. We've got an implementation of this which sends it out to Gearman, which is give your quick bullet on Gearman.
It's a job, essentially a job distribution, distributed job distribution, and you can essentially just be throwing packets out saying, you know, I don't want to log it here because maybe it's expensive to process on the server, so I'm just going to have this fire hose of logging events being sent out to some network that can process and analyze them at some later time. And you can do some really interesting things to look into that.
You can also, you know, because it's great when we finally catch up with 1978, you can log to syslog. And log to syslog without piping your log to the syslog logger command. So if you're not really concerned about the fact that if you're talking about, like, you know, logging aggregation, that's totally easy to do. If you're using like syslog-ng, which supports sort of network thing at your system level, and it's already sort of how your infrastructure is set up. You may notice this is a recurring theme. You can actually send all of this log information to the same place that all of the rest of the log information in your entire infrastructure is going. Fancy. And then using this interface to sort of show you how flexible this is, some of you may be aware of the Google user statistics patch, which gives you per user information about what queries are being executed and stuff like that, which I understand the ops guys particularly like the patch. So the way this was implemented, supported into Drizzle, and the way that it was ported is as a logging plugin that takes that grabs the query at as part of the logging interface, and then keeps track of it keeps track of the stats in memory and presents them as information schema tables. So you have access to all that information, so you can pretty much do anything you want, and it's not a hard injection inside anywhere. So we don't have like all sorts of counters sprinkled throughout the code. It's just sort of a filter on the logging event.
Yeah, which means if you don't need user stats, you're not incurring the cost of collecting all that information in the server because you didn't build the plugin.
Yeah. It also means that this is another thing that I'm excited about. I think we can write a similar plugin to do something different. If you wanted to do that user stat stuff but not store it in local memory, you could write something similar to the Gearman plugin combined with user stats. So collect the user stats as they happen, and then shuttle them across the network, maybe to a monitoring server, where you collect them and graph them and stuff. So there's all sorts of crazy stuff you can do in that.
So pluggable errors, this is pretty similar to the logging interface. It's essentially being able to, you know, when an error happens, instead of just putting it to some custom error log or proprietary sort of error log, you know, wherever that's configured, you can send it to, you know, standard error or syslog, or I think Monty wrote a lib notify plugin, so it pops up something on your desktop saying you just have an error.
Because what you definitely want is to have GNOME pop up a little window on your desktop for server-side errors.
But the point is, you know, if you have some existing monitoring software out there, it's really easy to write a plugin to notify that, rather than having to grab some error log and tail it and, you know, do all that stuff. Just write the plugin and, you know, send it to where you need it.
I realized while writing these things that we actually don't have. We have a syslog plugin for the logging. We don't have a syslog error plugin. I have no idea how we don't have a syslog error plugin.
I think you will by the end of today.
Yeah, I think we'll probably have to fix it. So functions are nothing new. MySQL's had UDFs. Most, I think, databases actually have some sort of UDF system. Basically, I'd like to just point out, yes, we do in fact have UDFs.
Easier to write, actually. Instead of having to, you know, jump all through all the hoops and specifying certain, you know, specifically named callbacks, you just, you know, implement a few class methods, you know, grabbing from a generic plugin class, and you have the UDF. You can pretty easily hack up anything.
I have the ROT13 listed on this slide because at LinuxConf Australia this last January, in Stuart's tutorial on writing plugins for Drizzle, one of the guys there wrote a fully functioning ROT13 UDF that's now a tree. So it took him, you know, all of the period of time that tutorial was, and he was able to go from knowing nothing to having that up, going, tested, and intrigue that quickly. And we were really happy about that because what Drizzle really been missing was a Route 13 function.
Yes. So we have plugable replication. So if you haven't heard
Oh, sorry?
what it does.
Oh, sorry. Route 13 is a ridiculously simple encryption method that takes the letter in a string and essentially adds 13 to the character code of it. So it wrote it and wrapping around C back to A. So yeah, it's not the world's most useful, but you know, it's fun.
The fact that you could write that plugin in the length of a session was why we have it on the slide.
Yeah.
Not for its usefulness.
Yeah. My dry sense of humor may not come across there.
So if you know anything about MySQL replication, just forget it. All that code we completely dropped for dev because we've all worked with it and we've all had our issues with it. And there's a lot better way of doing it. At least that's what we thought. And Jake Pipes has been the primary author on a lot of these plugin interfaces. And what you're able to do is plug in at multiple levels of replication. As far as what you want to apply, you can write a plugin to filter your replication stream. You can write a plugin to actually write your replication stream after it's been filtered. And we're using instead of using some custom format like the bin log, we're actually using Google protocol buffers. So when this replication stream was pumping proto buffers out into the network, you can read this with a Python script, or you can read this with some Java application that feeds your memcached cluster directly. You can write any number of plugins to tap into this essentially replication bus and do what you want.
We have a plugin that was written by Marcus Erickson. Marcus E. is all I ever know as CMS. That takes the replication stream and injects it into a RabbitMQ system. So if you've got things like RabbitMQ out there, you could basically take all these replication messages, inject them, and they're not just injected as dumb packets. You can actually treat those as object instances because there's Java bindings for protocol buffers. So you can do stuff with it and analyze it in a system that has absolutely nothing to do with Drizzle. That is like some other analytic system, which I think is potentially going to be pretty nice and huge because people do have other things in their system that aren't Drizzle, amazingly enough.
So we have this thing called the data dictionary. This is something that Brian Aker's been working on a lot lately. And it's sort of like information schema, but we're putting everything in there. You can actually write plugins to populate it. You can grab any number of statistics out of it. We're moving away from all the custom show variables, whatever. Just we have a database selected from the table and do the normal database operations. So don't have all these one-off commands. So we're putting a lot of information into this schema that has all sorts of information. And we mention information schema because it's sort of like that, but information schema is a standard, and there's a standard set of tables that need to be presented in a certain way. And this is something other databases like Postgres and SQL Server use that. So what we want to do is populate information schema sort of as a view of things selected out of the data dictionary. So we're able to provide all this other useful information, or give you the standards compliant set of filtered information if you want that too.
So that's all well great, but how does this actually work in real world? So installation is, we're trying to keep this as normal and standard if you have ever installed open source software in a Linux environment before. We're not spending a whole bunch of time working on making it easy for you in things like OS 10 because they're ridiculous platforms, but it does work there. So as a starting point here, if you're running a Debian or Debian-based system, it's extremely easy. I just got Drizzle uploaded to Debian, the Debian unstable release, which means it will eventually filter into testing and then stable eventually, because of the long release process there. It might take a little while. But that's there. So if you happen to be running Debian unstable at the moment, you don't have to do anything special. You can just apt-get install Drizzle, and all your stuff will magically install and work, other than the fact that I need to point out there's a bug in the Debian package that I just fixed and uploaded that it doesn't create the log directory. So it might take another day or two for the fixed packages to show up here. Thanks, Max, for pointing that out, and also students. Anyway. But if you're not running Debian Unstable, because very few people actually run that on their production servers, they're crazy, I know. We do have a personal package archive up on Launchpad, which is where we do all the Drizzle development.
Which is essentially an app repository custom for the Drizzle ecosystem.
Yep. So if you are running on Ubuntu Karmic or later, you basically just have to do these 3 commands. The first 3 add the relevant PPA locations to your Debian sources list. Basically add the location of the repository into the system so the system knows how to track it, and then install Drizzle and you're good to go. If you're running Ubuntu before Karmic, there's a couple more steps you've got to do because they don't have the add app repository command in Jaunty and earlier, so you'll have to actually edit your sources list by hand. It's not that hard to do, but you can figure it out.
If you're on an RPM-based system, it's pretty much the same process. Rather than spelling out all the commands, we link to a nice wiki page that, is it BJ?
Yeah, BJ Dirkus. Like Circus, great. BJ Dirkus, like Circus.
Also known as
The Dirkus. Made the RPMs for us and set up a Yum repository. Really the only reason that those specific instructions aren't here is they do involve adding like 7 lines to a conf file. You should slide very nicely. But at that point, you can just Yum install Drizzle and all is good.
When you upgrade, you'll get all the new releases because we have a 2-week release cycle. So we try to keep it pretty fresh. And if you're on things like FreeBSD or you're just, the hacker type you like to install it from source, it's configure, make, install. There's no nastiness around the autocom system. Monty has put hours or days,
Years of my life. Years
into
of my life.
normalizing our autocom system so it behaves like it should. Like any normal source package. You expect configure, make, install does the thing we want. We now are able to do that.
And the thing, I'm not sure if anybody here has ever installed MySQL from source, but once you do, there's a bunch of stuff you've got to make your relationship appropriate. It's got to create system labels. It's got to do a couple of other things. You don't have to do that. Drizzle doesn't have any system tables. It doesn't have anything that needs to be pre-populated, so you can literally make a directory, my data path, whatever it is, and you can start Drizzle from the command line with Drizzle-D, tell it where the data directory is. It's the only required parameter. If it doesn't know where, actually, you don't even have to specify a data directory. It defaults to prefix local signature. So it'll on a completely bog standard default thing. It'll be user local or Drizzle that it'll default to. Not a lot of people really like to stick their data there. And you don't also anyway. But yeah, so this is all you got to do. No extra steps, no extra jumping through hoops. Everything else is optional because you may want to do your system different.
So if you want to use one of the plugins that we've been talking about, you just add -- plugin add, I want LDAP, or I want MD5 functions, or I want this. You just plugin add whatever you want.
Yeah, and
Pretty much that's it.
plugins are only loaded at startup and they're only unloaded at shutdown. We do not support runtime loading or unloading of plugins. So that's, and the plugin add command can, just like any other command line option, go into your drizzle.conf file, which is pretty much very similar to the MySQL.conf file, except instead of being etc.cnf, it's in etc.drizzle.cnf, which is crazy.
Yeah, and if you're wondering about why we don't support dynamic plugin loading, at runtime, like, hey, my server's been running for a day, I want to add this plugin without shutting it down. There's very few use cases where people do that. And when you have to support that type of dynamic module loading, you're actually incurring, a few steps there that you basically need to log to make sure you know which plugins you have loaded. And there are ways around this, and it can get really complicated. But essentially, we get better concurrency wins by not supporting dynamic module loading, because you don't have to check, oh, make sure I have this plugin for it actually run it. We know at startup, these things are loaded, just use them. Because if you're really loading and unloading plugins in a production environment, you're probably just asking for a role to occur there because eventually something will go wrong and your symbols don't match up.
Yeah. But so one of the other things here that I find particularly pleasant about that is we're working on getting a sort of standard built-in system for having an extra directory of sort of drop-in configuration file snippets, so that if you do a package managed add, so if I install Drizzle plugin PBXT, that package can drop its enabling configuration file into a directory, and you don't have to do anything. And additionally to that, you don't have to have a sysadmin install the plugin and then connect to the database as a database user and run like a SQL command to install the plugin. You can install the plugin, on the system where you install other stuff.
So if you're familiar with like Debian or Ubuntu, how it does it, there's always like that, etc, HTTPD, conf.d directory that every time you install the module, it just drops a new file in there and it just loads it at startup. It's basically using that. I guess that's pretty standard at this point.
I might actually try and steal the Debian Apache, and I think it might have filtered out to the other people at this point, or it might have come from somewhere else, but I live in the Debian world, so I think we did everything. But they've got a couple of command line tools that admins can use to, from a pool of available installed plugins on the system, change what's enabled and what's disabled at server startup time without having to edit configuration files. So that if you do things like uninstall the plugin, it automatically gets rid of the configuration stuff for you so that your system is in a consistent state. So I'll probably, at some point, steal those tools and modify them to our needs.
So what do you need to walk in Drizzle? That was the reasoning behind this name. So last October, I live in Portland, Oregon, and I've been sponsoring student groups at Portland State University. And I went to the student group who they have to do a senior capstone project to graduate. So it's required that they have to do this. And what happens is community members, from businesses or open source projects come in and they pitch a project, a whole series of projects, and the student groups get to choose, hey, I want to work on your project. And then you essentially get 5 to 6 students for 6 months to do whatever you want. So that's kind of cool. And I like free labor. Yeah. So what I did is I pitched this project because the Drizzle command line tool that's based on the MySQL command line tool, it works usually, and it has its issues, but it's been there forever. There's a lot of really cool shells out there, for other projects that do some really neat things. And we thought, hey, while we're doing all this stuff on the server side, why don't we reinvent the client side as well? So I pitched this project to create a new database shell. Initially, it was a C++ project for Drizzle. It turned into a Python project for all databases, so feature creep. So what it is a new command line tool that is pluggable, it's scriptable. You can actually have multiple languages that you talk to the shell. So as you're typing commands, you can actually write a new language to interpret whatever you're typing to do the correct SQL command. And what we're doing is making it multi-server aware. So you're able to, talk to multiple servers and maybe aggregate results when you're talking to those servers. So if you're managing a cluster of, 500 machines and you need to connect to all of them to run a command, you can just do that, with, config file setup with your nodes and type a single SQL command for the shell.
Yeah, so one of the things that I was sort of, when I was talking with them about this, originally with the pluggable scriptable part, that made me excited is I know when I was doing consulting for people and in administration, there's a certain set of tasks that sit somewhere in between I'm actually going to type them in at the MySQL command line, and I'm actually going to write a program in a programming language using that programming language's API to connect to the database to do a task. There's a sort of a mid-range set of administrative things like I need to alter all of the tables in this database from my ISAM to InnoDB. I don't really want to write a full-blown program to do that, but when I do that on the command line and I do, MySQL -e show tables from schema, pipe, awk, pipe sed, pipe Perl, pipe xargs, MySQL -e, blah, 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 blah. I can do that. I have done that. it's sort of ugly. And so it felt like if the shell itself could understand a slightly larger, not full-blown programming language necessary. I mean, you know, in this case, it can use Python, but you don't have to go DB API. You don't have to write like cursors and handlers and things like that. You can actually just write some queries and know that what you might want to do is loop over the results. That would be particularly useful to me. So thankfully they gave me the ability to do that.
So I mentioned it has pluggable languages, or lingos, as they're called. And what you're able to do is, this is a language, you can see the -l plugin in MySQL, you know, like the MySQL command line to user, host, or, you know, normal options. You say language PySQL, and what this gives you is SQL syntax like it normally does in old clients, except you can have pipes and you can write modules to process, you know, your data in different, you know, streams along that pipe. So just like you can in Bash, you know, pipe into sed or awk or whatever, you can, you know, run a SQL command piped into some module that does almost separate values or, you know, any number of things. So right now, you know, there's just a few plugins, but what we want to encourage is that if there's some use case like, hey, I would really use a command like this that, you know, outputted this module into something that got into my custom accounting system, you know, you can write that module and it's always available to you in your archive. So, you know, if you're really interested in getting involved in, you know, moving towards something like this, it's another Launchpad project. I think it's mentioned here, launchpad.net/boots. You know, it's still a little bit early on, but, you know, there's a lot of momentum behind it right now, and we're really excited. And actually, one of the students who worked on it was able to come down, Max, over there. He's going to be helping out at the Drizzle booth in the Expo hall, so if you want, you know, a lot more information about it, just find him in the Expo hall at the booth, or around the conference, and he'll tell you all about it.
And for all the folks who think that the whole plugin thing that we've got going on in Drizzle is great, but they don't really want to write C++ plugins, well, this is pluggable, and you only have to write Python. So, which is potentially more accessible to some folks. So,
and one other thing to mention about you know, where you can use this, since it's Python and since it's based on the Python DB API, any database that the common Python interface supports, we can probably hack into it pretty easily. So if you want to use this with Postgres or with Oracle or anything else, you'll be able to say, you know, maybe you'll have a pipe command that says select star from my table in MySQL, pipe it into this other server over here that's Postgres, and it'll handle all the translation underneath for you. So you can do migration with a single line in this tool.
yes, yeah. Multiple server support across multiple different database platforms. Yep. Almost like that. So that's pretty much what we got. I think we're close to time, actually, but I think we've got some time for questions if anybody has any. Like Ronald has questions. Ask us a question, Ronald.
Can I use boots to like pipe commands into it?
Yes.
So I don't have to start new connections?
Yes.
So it's monitoring.
How's that?
But can you do it dynamically? Like, can you have like an open thread that means like to say like, you know, hey, run show process list and then take a while and run show on this ass and be able to change those dynamically so that we get a new connection every time we're already monitoring?
Great idea.
Well, yeah, I think they keep a lot. It's always a matter of doing something, so there's some operation like that you definitely include a pause, you know, and then it has other additional statements. If the query of statements finishes, then you exit. But you want to be able to append to that list or change. It's almost like a queue, but it saves the overhead of opening and creating and destroying a connection with something that you want to do.
Yeah.
Is that a good enough question?
Yes, thank you. And Max will have that done for you soon.
And actually, next step would be to demonize it. So if I want to run something against schema, say like white dog,
Yeah.
so I touch D and nothing more.
Yeah.
Can we do that? Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, we can make it easier.
Yeah, that will also be done today.
Thank
Hacking is a huge.
You wanted to get some good hacking work done this week, right?
Right.
Because these totally be useful for like Nagios stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, I think, and the other thing to point out too is that it's Python, so correct me if I'm wrong, Max, of course, but a lot of the stuff that's here, there's nothing to stop you from, you know, sort of writing a Python thing that was maybe in something else and importing this as a library essentially and calling its functionality. You know, so you could also potentially do that if you had something like, say, Xenos, which is monitoring similar to Cacti and Nagios, that's written in Python, then it could actually just use boots.
This is good for modeling. So say you create a new plugin or something, Cacti, and you are not sure how it's going to work out. So, but if I can option run once and demonize it and run it for a couple of minutes and see how it goes.
Oh, yeah.
And next step, I'll create my own plugin and publish it on the source community.
And in fact, if you could just, similar to that, in the thing, if it supported, say, like, you know, ampersands at the end of the query, so that you could, you know, have like job control, like you did in the Unix shell, that would be cool.
Yeah, that is actually on the roadmap.
Oh, that's on the roadmap. Check that out.
So you will be able to have background SQL commands running, and you can ask for the results when you want.
Guys, a question. So I remember it was back and forth about stats collection and I know that stats collection is always sensitive subjects for performance. So where we stand today on that?
So right now, like the thing that I mentioned earlier with the user stats plugin is doing that via the combination of the logging interface and the data dictionary interface. Which actually seems to be a pretty reasonably low intrusive way of doing that collection. To do stats collection similar to that, to push into something like a Nagios or Cacti or Xenos or something like that, wouldn't be a very big stretch from what that user stats patch is at the moment. And you wouldn't necessarily have to do it per user as that one's done. But yeah, I think that it will not be very difficult to write some things like that to do non-intrusive stats collection.
What would be extremely useful is to have, say, QA.
Yeah.
So we should have like totally crazy amount of information available, but which can be used during very limited time before production.
Yeah.
So you can collect all query relations and order and timing and this and that. Stick it in a wall in front of your post and say, hey, we've done it. Let's launch.
Yeah. Well, and actually, not to pimp out lots of things that don't exist yet, but that we had that. Another thing that Eric and I were talking about a few weeks ago was doing the proxy thing that could play against multiple servers at the same time. So you could put a QA server parallel to your production server, stick in a thing that would fork the queries off and run them against both servers at the same time, and collect your stupid amounts of stuff that would be killing performance normally on the one, and let the other one stay in production, which would potentially be, we don't have any of that right now, but things like that, yeah, that I would love to see that, because yeah, instrumenting the highly overloaded database typically tends to be more expensive than the overloaded database can handle, which is unfortunate at times. Yes?
I just wonder what kind of market share you are target on. Do you compete with like Microsoft Access or Excel?
I think we're more competing against, although I like to think that there's a large enough pie that we can think of ourselves as not as competitors, but complementing or competing with MySQL and MariaDB and Postgres and sort of the other open source databases. I still don't think that for the specific niche of access, the open source world still doesn't have diddly squat that can do that.
Our plan is to use MySQL for back-end content creation systems and Drizzle for billions of users hitting web servers.
Yeah.
That's where it fits.
Yeah, lighter weight stuff where you've got, and I originally used to talk about this a lot when MySQL sort of first came on the scene. One of the things that made it ludicrously successful was the fact that it had virtually no features, but was really fast and easy to use and didn't get in your way. And we're not quite, I mean, we've got a plugin architecture, so we're not quite at the level of MySQL 3 in terms of lightweightness. But it's that idea that something that wants to handle gobs of small queries, and then maybe be able to interface with other things. We were talking the other day about a Cassandra replication plugin to replicate from Drizzle into Cassandra for doing whatever it is that you want to do with an OSQL store, for instance. We've also talked about Cassandra storage engines and things of that nature. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely in the traditional open source database area, and like we were mentioning earlier, as far as the cloud goes, or whatever the definitions you want to interpret, starting to take into account those new restrictions and those architectures, and trying to work with there, and not just with the servers in the cloud.
It's kind of like it looks like MySQL is going to go to the more mature core products like Oracle support. Then, I just wonder if you add in all those plugins, you become a MySQL.
Well, yeah, but hopefully if we keep them as plugins, then for the people that want it to scale it back, they can just not enable those. Because like turning off, when MySQL adds like new geographical data types or something like that, and you don't want those in your database, you can't really turn them off. You can't say, I don't really want stored procedures in MySQL, I don't use them, and
Unfortunately, when they do add things like stored procedures, since they are integrated into the rest of the code base, you're incurring the cost of those even though you don't want them. So if we can keep them modular, you can just say, don't load this, it doesn't cost me anything because it's not in the runtime.
So kind of like you have to make sure that all the plug is completely mutually exclusive.
Mhm.
So that means I can select what plug I want, but still run it.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly where we want to go.
Maybe we stand for the word lightweight for bow use, or,
That's a good point.
Yeah, the
when
lightweight-
Drizzle was first announced, a lot of people said, oh, we have SQLite, what do we need Drizzle for?
Yeah.
It's totally not the same thing.
It is
You
so
mentioned
not the same as
access.
SQL.
Yeah.
And access is used in the
Lightweight.
enterprise for like a 1 or 2 person application, and that's totally the opposite of what Drizzle's goal
Yeah,
is.
we actually scale decently well, up to large numbers of connections, and we get the same transaction per second count, as the others. Because we've reduced a lot of concurrency detention on the server. So we are still a high performance, high concurrency database. We're just trying to do it in a lightweight. And I think we're good servers and stuff.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.